my husband and I decided to drive down to Atlanta because we wanted to tour the hospital and meet the doctors that wrote Logan's treatment plan.
That's awesome.
So we did that. During that conversation and chatting with one of the doctors that wrote his treatment plan, we were talking about the feeding tube. And she said, oh, we have this great program down here with the Marcus Autism Center. It's, they've got outpatient and inpatient. It's a feeding program. It's all psychology based. And I was like, tell me more.
Yeah.
Immediately, I got everything together. We had an intake call, and Logan got accepted in May.
Welcome to A Place of Yes. I'm your host, Heather Strader, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And all I can say is I dug deep, figured out where I was and where I wanted to be. And for me, the answer was in a place of yes. Welcome to the show. Many of you know how much I love these conversations on A Place of Yes. I love talking to moms and families like mine. Sometimes, though, these conversations can be emotionally difficult, and now, more than ever, I am paying attention to my wellness journey. One thing I started really paying attention to was my protein intake. High-protein foods and snacks keep my energy high, and they help me get the most out of my workouts. All my friends know I can be kind of a weirdo about it, and even Christine, my producer, knows I always have high-protein snacks in my bag all the time. Some of my favorites are Chomps, Bear Bells, especially the cookie dough bar, and Quest chips. What are your favorites? What do you like for high-protein snacks? Send me a message. Hi, so I am really excited to be here with Jennifer Fogg, Logan's mom. And Jennifer and I was trying to think when we started working together with Jake's Help from Heaven. And I knew that you knew pretty well one of our former board members, Natalie Sillery.
Yes.
And I was trying to remember if we met through her or if we had met prior to that. And I don't know if you remember.
I think it's prior to that.
I was thinking so.
So it must have been somebody, I don't know if it was a social worker from the hospital or someone had hooked us up with Jake's when we were looking.
Years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, now, because I was looking, I have my little cheat sheet. I think we started in like 2015. 2019.
There you go.
Okay.
I was going to say, because Logan will be 8
I was like, wait, that math is not mathing with me.
Okay. Yeah, 2019. Exactly.
Okay. So let's talk first about Logan. I just want to say that, social media certainly has its like ups and downs, right? But I think you do such a great job of sharing all of the moments.
Thank you.
And I feel like I know Logan. And most of the work that we do at Jake's with you is not necessarily like, we don't do a lot of like bringing items and delivering and stuff. We work with supporting Logan in music therapy.
Correct.
Which we love to do, but it also means that I don't get as hands-on as I do with some of our other kids and families. It is so great for me to be able to see him grow and the good things and the challenges, all of the things. Yeah. Through social media. So can you share with the audience a little bit about Logan and his story?
So Logan was diagnosed with a congenital glioblastoma at 3.5 months old. Basically, the best way to describe it, it's the worst type of brain tumor at the best time in his life. We were told several times he would never survive. We were told he'd never walk, talk, eat. He is now 7.5 and does all of those things. But
did you know in utero that there was anything, or was it just at 3.5 months?
Yeah, no, he was actually born emergency C-section at 35 weeks and 5 days because they found fluid on his brain, which ended up being a brain bleed. And they were just monitoring the brain bleed. They tested him for anything and everything. They said it looks like a birth defect. We'll just monitor it. Even when I had the emergency C-section, they told us, like, we think it's a deadly platelet disorder and he's not going to survive birth. And
oh, wow. Okay.
I had a few choice words for the
I'm
doctors,
sure you did.
And I said, figure it out. And then they were monitoring it. The brain bleed was dissipating. So he was born on November 18th, 2016. At the end of December, the brain bleed was going away. So they're like, okay, we'll start PT just to get ahead of it, and we'll just keep an eye on it.
So almost like a clean bill of health.
Yeah. So on March 8th, 2017, we went back for a follow-up MRI, and that's when we got the devastating news that our son had a brain tumor.
And obviously there's a connection from what happened, like from the brain bleed or, okay.
So basically what they think is he was born with the tumor grew off the brain bleed.
Okay.
So by the time they actually found the tumor, it was a third of the size of his head.
So what did that look like? So you get this news, and did you have to instantly
start treating it?
He was instantly admitted to the hospital. They asked me when was the first time he ever had a seizure, and I said he's never had a seizure. They told us that if we would have waited a week later, it would have been too late. They immediately admitted him into the NICU. They did a biopsy. They sent the biopsy to New York City, Boston, and Atlanta, the 3 best children's hospitals on the East Coast. They didn't know what type of tumor it was. They grade tumors.
Okay.
So it was came back 2, 3, and 4. So it was all over the place. There was no rhyme or reason to it. But it was very, very aggressive. And they told us, we're so sorry. There's really not much we can do. We'll try to treat it, but the outlook doesn't look good.
As Jake's mom, our story was a little different, but I know so well when you're talking about some of those conversations, right? And some of those things that doctors say. I always try to remember, especially now, I'm not in it like you still are in it, so I can be a little bit more reflective.
Sure.
But in that moment and in those moments, it is so hard to hear. And sometimes it's the delivery, sometimes it's what they're saying, sometimes it's both. I can only imagine you kind of went through this first part, right? You hear the scary thing happen and you think you got through it. Then all of a sudden, 3 months later, you're hearing all of this again. How did you and your husband, how did you respond? I imagine from what I know of you, you guys fought, not with each other. You just fought on behalf.
Yeah. I had Logan at 40. I knew that I did not wait till I was 40 years old to have my only child for God to take him away from me. So him not beating his brain tumor was not an option. Him not surviving birth was not an option. 3 days after they got the biopsy back, they said, okay, we're cautiously optimistic. And I was like, all right, let's go. We're fighting this. We're going to beat it. The one thing about, we had Dr. Weintraub at clinic. What I loved about her is she was very transparent. She wouldn't sugarcoat it. She told us like it was, even if we didn't want to hear it. She would actually start trusting me if, Logan wasn't reacting well or he wasn't doing this or he was doing that. I'm like, well, I think it's this. And she's like, well, I don't know. And I was like.
So you had real conversations.
Yeah, very real conversations.
And that's so rare. We had that a couple times along Jake's journey, right? And no one knows their child better. Then I should say their parent, but I'm actually going to say their mother, right?
Yeah,
because
100%.
you lock in, right?
Yep.
And you're watching everything.
Yep.
Like the better level of a doctor. Like some of the brilliant doctors, they do listen because they know that, right?
Yeah.
So I even like the way you use the word trust. At first I was like, oh, where are you going with this? But now I know what you mean. Like what you said mattered.
100%. It was a very aggressive chemotherapy. So typically with brain tumors and the type of brain tumor he had, they treat with radiation, but they don't radiate under the age of 3.
Okay.
So we had no choice but to do chemo. So he had a very aggressive chemotherapy plan for 6 months. We were inpatient for the better part of 6 months at Albany Medical Center. After 2 rounds of chemo, the tumor shrunk in half. And again, in hindsight, you look at things, well, because now he has a brain injury because they had to remove the tumor and now he doesn't have his left frontal lobe. And it's like, I honestly didn't realize they removed a piece of his brain for 3 months after his tumor resection.
Okay.
They're like, Jen, you saw the image, you saw the scan, you knew we went in. I was like, because you're
hyper focused.
You're such in fight or flight mode that your body, your brain is just protecting yourself from accepting those things that happen. He went through 2 major tumor resections.
So how old is he? He's still under a year?
He's 7 months old at this point.
Yep.
Yeah. May of 2017, he had two tumor resections within a week of each other. The first one, they removed 50% of the tumor. And then a week later, they removed another 45% of the tumor. So they left 5% in the middle of his brain where his memory bank was.
Okay.
They didn't want to touch that, but the chemo ended up getting it. So he had 6 rounds of very aggressive inpatient treatment. He was supposed to have 8 rounds of outpatient treatment, but he actually only ended up having 5 rounds of outpatient treatment because they felt they had treated him so aggressively and there was no evidence of disease. They, at that point, wanted to focus more on his development rather than the cancer.
Okay. And has he been cancer-free since then?
He is officially a survivor as of September 2023, so 5 years.
Oh, I have chills.
Yeah.
That's so awesome.
So 5 years, you're deemed, a survivor. So he has been cancer and treatment free since September 24th, 2018. So yeah, it's been a very long journey. Like I said, they said he never walk. And one of my goals was to get him to start walking before he started preschool. And thanks to Jake's help from heaven, we got a piece of equipment called a stander to literally help him just know what it feels like to stand upright in order to start walking. The poor kid was flat on his back for almost the first 2 years of his life because he was getting treatment. So he never, it took him forever to even sit up on his own. And he also had a helmet for a while as well to reshape his head because
so many surgeries.
The back of his head was so flat from
laying back,
laying on the back of his head.
Do you think he has like PTSD? Like, do you think that he remembers those? And
do.
I don't know that that's, I was going to say, it's
100%.
I know from like a family perspective for sure, right?
Yeah,
like, because I just even like, when Jake was in the hospital, those 117 days, like I know that has changed the course of who I am as a person, who Brian is, and frankly, Ethan. Ethan was a 2-year-old at that point. So it has an impact on everybody.
Yeah, so he has what they call white coat syndrome, which is basically
scared of
when he goes into doctors' rooms or doctors' offices, like it's a very traumatic experience. A lot of our doctors, we actually have a note in his record that says 1 or 2 people at a time.
Okay.
I love Albany Med. I love the hospital. I love that it's a teaching hospital, but we don't allow students because it's overwhelming. It's overstimulating for him and for me. Let's be honest, right? Like, I'm not going to answer all these questions when it's in his chart and his doctor knows him. Like, I appreciate that you want to learn, but come in after with them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's definitely traumatic. Actually, I know you wanted to talk about Atlanta, and I remember a conversation I had with one of the psychologists when we were in Atlanta for Logan's feeding program. She recognized that I had PTSD because one of Logan's responses is he'll hit his head like this. And
which then
my initial reaction, especially as a mom, your kid's hitting himself, you want him to stop.
Yep.
She said, do you realize what that does to you? I'm like, yeah, I want him to stop. She goes, that's where his tumor was. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I just lost it. And I was like, I never
put it together.
I never put it together. And I was like, holy, like that is true.
I think they're starting to really associate, like so much happens not only to the child, right, but to the parents when you are literally fighting for their lives, when it's not just a one-time incident, when it is a ongoing all day, every day, there's an impact on that. And there's no way that there can't be. Yeah. And I do think that it is interesting, it's not the word, but I think it's great that they are starting to associate that. You can treat it better when you know why you're responding the way you are, or when you can face it.
Exactly.
So you brought up Atlanta, and I am so excited to talk about this. So jump in when I get this wrong, but from what I understand, you and your husband went to Atlanta for 8 weeks?
Almost 11 weeks.
11, okay. For a solid chunk of time, like left your job, packed up the car, drove to Atlanta, rented an apartment so that you could participate, Logan could participate in this intensive feeding therapy.
Correct.
And there's 2 things that I am so excited to hear about with that. One is I love when we as moms, as parents, as families, like when you really have this approach of like, this is an issue, how can we solve it? And I just think that is such a great model for Logan, right? Like to know that we're going to figure this out and we're going to do the best we can. And maybe it won't always work out the way we want, but we're going to figure it out. And I love that you guys did that. So can you talk a little bit about the decision leading up to that and also what those 11 weeks were like?
Another thing we learned in the past couple of years is developmentally, Logan never learned how to eat. Okay. He was getting treatment for the first 2 years of his life. And the first 2 years of your life is when you learn how to eat.
Okay.
This poor kid was getting chemo and throwing up the first 2 years of his life,
which I'm sure has some creating aversions.
Wanted nothing to do with food. So he started taking food by mouth, and then he ended up getting the flu like when he was like 2.5, 3 years old.
Okay.
And because of he had the feeding tube. He ended up in the hospital for a week. So again, he didn't want food near his mouth. So he had
all negative thoughts.
Oral aversion for years and years and years. And we've always done speech and feeding therapy outpatient. The irony of our journey is I work for Aflac. I sell cancer insurance for a living. I had the cancer plan on my son when he was diagnosed, and Aflac's Children's Cancer and Blood Disorder Center in Atlanta wrote Logan's treatment plan that we were able to administer here in Albany, New York.
Wow.
So that didn't give you the chills. February last year, my husband and I decided to drive down to Atlanta because we wanted to tour the hospital and meet the doctors that wrote Logan's treatment plan.
That's awesome.
So we did that. During that conversation and chatting with one of the doctors that wrote his treatment plan, we were talking about the feeding tube. And she said, oh, we have this great program down here with the Marcus Autism Center. It's, they've got outpatient and inpatient. It's a feeding program. It's all psychology based. And I was like, tell me more.
Yeah.
Immediately, I got everything together. We had an intake call, and Logan got accepted in May last year.
Okay.
He had to love insurance. So we got approved and then denied. And it was just a whole bunch of back and forth. And obviously, you know me, I wasn't giving up.
Yep.
So we got it approved. So we started January 4th. We packed up our car on January 1st. So Happy New Year. Best way to start.
I was going to say, what a great start to the new year.
We drove to North Carolina to visit my in-laws and then drove to Atlanta. And for 10 weeks, it was like Groundhog Day. It was the same thing every day, but it's all psychology based. The goal was to get him accepting food by mouth. The first almost 2 weeks was more so getting him over that white coat syndrome I was talking about. Okay. And getting him used to sitting in a chair, getting him used to having food in front of him, getting him used to having utensils and placing those demands.
All things, like you said, that you learn starting at what, like 8 months? Or you start in those first 2 years that he didn't have.
Yeah, so Logan has the brain injury, so he's got a TBI. He's also got an autism diagnosis. He's got bilateral hearing aids. He has the feeding tube, and he also has a shunt. So kid's got a lot going on. This program, he had 2 days the whole time we were down there that he took 100% of his nutrition by mouth, which is
that's awesome.
Amazing. I'm glad we stayed because it was supposed to be 8 weeks. We got an extension for 10 weeks, and I'm glad we did because he ended up getting sick the end of the 7th week, and I was like, oh my gosh. So they helped figure out how to work through that. They have like all these protocols, like when you introduce a new food. Like it was as simple as giving him an empty spoon. That was the first thing. Then they would put literally a rice-sized piece of food on a spoon, and then they just went up to like a full rounded size. So now he's taken full rounded sizes. He is a vegetarian. By default, like it just happened. We had him try, it's all pureed foods. So chicken breast, chicken nuggets, Swedish meatballs, and hot dogs, which pureed hot dogs just don't sound good anyway.
So sidebar, Jake's food was all pureed.
Okay.
So he ate by mouth up until the end, but I had to puree everything. And I have like friends and family who would be like, what the hell are you feeding this kid? Because I would puree everything. Like it's all he knew. So he would eat it. Like, it'd be Thanksgiving. I'd be like, all right.
We're having jerky.
Right, here's a little stuff in here, some potatoes, here's cranberry sauce. I'd mix it all up. It looked foul. But he would, and then he was like on the keto diet for a little while, and I'd make him like keto cheesecake. I'd put out, all the things.
You make it work.
You make it work.
And to that point, right, it's all about creating that sense of normalcy.
Well, and that is it. And that is, we'll talk more about the program, but I want to come back to the fact that you made this happen. Yeah. We talk a lot in the show about, the place of yes, like how the world hands you a lot of stuff, and you can either drown in it or you can figure out how to handle it. That's just a great example, right? Because there's one world where you could take all of these things, and Logan could have all of these things, and you could just be stuck in it. I talk about grief, and grief isn't just the grief that I have for losing Jake. Grief is sometimes we grieve the lives that we thought we were going to have.
Exactly.
And when I hear you talk, I think about that. So do you feel like there's a part of you that had to come to terms?
I'm still coming to terms with it.
I'm still coming to terms with it. So I assume that everyone is, but I know that some people are kind of like a little bit.
It's hard. Yeah. It's really hard. But I think that's why I throw myself into so much stuff. It's because helping other people and then obviously helping my child gives me so much satisfaction that I hate what we've been through. I hate what we go through. Yep. But if I can share my story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that's exactly what I do, to help somebody else, then I've done my job.
And that's what it is, right? The whole point of the show a little bit is, channeling your grief for good. There are days, certainly, where that is much harder than others.
Absolutely.
There's moments of sadness and frustration and all of those things. But I do think we live in a world now where we can have these conversations, where we can talk about it, where we can share the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's got to make a difference, right?
Better.
So with Kevin, he's a hands-on dad from what I can tell. How has it changed your relationship? I'm sure it did, right?
Yeah.
How have you had to really pivot with this?
It's really hard. I remember there were times when Logan was first going through treatment. I took a leave of absence from work, but after 2 or 3 months, he ended up having to go back to work. And there'd be times where there would be an issue and I'd have to call him in the middle of the night. And he's like, I'm sleep,
You start to resent each other sometimes.
It put a lot of strain on our marriage. And, again, we met later in life. We had him later in life. We'd only been married for a couple of years before we had him. And so we never had the real honeymoon phase. So my husband's amazing. We just have such a great relationship where if I'm having a moment or if I'm upset, or if I'm like, oh, Logan's never going to do this or that. And my husband's like, nope, we got this. We're going to go, 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 go. You know what I mean? So he's always got the opposite side of that, and vice versa, which really makes us strong. And we know, like, there's certain things, like we get Proctor's tickets every year. Right? Like we get an annual membership because that's what you're going to do. It's a forced date night. And I hate to say it like that, but it's like,
if you don't make it happen.
Right. That's something that we have that we know that we're going to do together, regardless of what's going on.
I love that. I think that's huge. And I think it's so important because so many times when couples have sometimes even not a sick kid, but just, it's hard to make time for each other. And then there's resentment, and then there's things. And I just love that you guys do that. And I love that you have a solid thing. Like everything else that comes along is an added bonus, but like it's great to know that. So I think that's huge.
And it was great too, even when we were in Atlanta, one of my husband's best friends lives down there. So we got to spend time with them and their kids. And then my in-laws were only a few hours away, so they would come down. So we actually got a couple of date nights while we were down there,
that's kind of fun.
Which was nice. Like I said before, it was literally Groundhog Day. Like you get up, you go to clinic. He had 4 sessions a day. In between the third and the fourth session was like a gap where he would take a nap.
Okay.
Then we would get home, and then I would go to the gym, or he would go to the gym. Then we would have dinner, and then we would have to do bites with Logan at home. The next day, all over again. So it was the same thing every day. We had weekends off. We took advantage of being tourists down there. So, we went to the zoo, we went to the aquarium, like all that fun stuff. It was a lot. And we've only been home.
I was going to say, you've only been home
a week and a half.
Okay.
Like we just got home last Sunday.
And how is the transition home?
Everybody's in their schedules. I'm not. Logan's back to school. My husband, ironically enough, just started a new job when we got back.
Okay.
And I go back to work next week. I'm still trying to get my house
in
order. One of the things too was we lived on so little for 3 months. You
didn't have a lot of stuff.
And like I go home, I'm like, why do I have 20 coffee cups? There's like just me and my husband. Like this is ridiculous. So like I'm in this purge mode as well.
Let's talk a little bit about Jake's Help from Heaven. Yeah. And for the listeners who don't know, Jake's Help from Heaven was started by my husband and I after our son Jake passed. He was 4 years old when he passed. And we started a foundation to help individuals who have like multiple medical challenges, whether it's congenital or childhood onset, but it's just, we try to come from a place of yes all the time. We try to get equipment that's needed or reimburse for medical travel or technology. And one of the things that we do is that we also fund kind of what we call alternative therapies. We call them alternative because they're not traditionally covered by insurances. And one of those is music therapy. And we have awarded, I want to say since 2019, I think, music therapy for Logan. So can you talk a little bit about music therapy and how it's impacted Logan?
So I'm going to give you a little backstory that I didn't give you a heads up on yet.
All right. I like it.
So when Logan was inpatient, the music therapist would try to come in all the time, and I'd be like, get out of here. You're crazy. Like, what are you doing? Like,
what is this?
Yeah. He's a baby. Like, he doesn't know what you're doing. Like, stop bothering me. So fast forward to, him getting outpatient services and, looking at all these different therapies and researching brain injuries. I was like, oh my gosh, music therapy is like amazing for traumatic brain injuries. Logan, and you've obviously seen his pictures, like walks around with his iPad like it's a 80s style boombox.
That's so funny.
Like loves music, loves race cars too, but loves music. So when we got him to music therapy, not only, again, did Jake's help us with that standard, when we found out about the grant for the music therapy, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So Logan's been getting music therapy like literally weekly for 5 years. And he loves it. It is so much fun. It's so creative.
Our board, this is, and it was, I think we've been doing it the longest with Logan. So it was probably over Logan's applications. Some of our board members were like, what is this music therapy? Like we don't understand. Like, why are we paying someone to play music? So we had a music therapist come in because the board was divided, right? Like we all believed that it was a good thing, but we didn't know enough.
Right.
So I had a music therapist come in, talk to us about what a session looks like and show us videos and all of this stuff. And we were all, hook, line, and sinker, like, oh my goodness. At the time, we had a member on our board who was just like very like, this is nonsense. And then at the end, and he was asking all his questions, right? He was like firing them off. And she had these great answers for everything. But it's funny, in the beginning, you're like, stop it. Like, what is this? But it's hugely valuable.
But I can even think back to like 8th grade chorus. Like I remember Alabama and Alaska, Arizona are like, right? You remember things and it just works.
That's awesome.
Like,
and I think for certain kids, it just really works.
Yep.
Like it just helps them learn things and helps them relax and helps them focus on other things. Because that's one of the things they talked about. It's not just like the playing music, but it's like, okay, you've got the music going on here, but then we're working on almost like PT and OT, like other things are happening.
I mean, think of Wheels on the Bus, right? You do all the movements, or like Old MacDonald, you do all the animal sounds. Like they're learning.
I love that he loves it.
He does. It's amazing.
At Jake's, we have applicants who use several different music therapy places, kind of depending on where they live and what's more convenient. And some are online and some are in person. It's not inexpensive. So it is certainly a way that we love to be able to jump in and help, because if we're covering music therapy, that's taking away some of what you would spend. And then you can do things that, because I always feel it's so important too. And you talked about this a little bit. Like, so you went to Atlanta, you got insurance to cover it. You had this experience with your family. In addition to all of that work you did, how great is it that you could go to the zoo on a Saturday or go to the aquarium and still have these experiences? Right. Because I do think sometimes people forget to see the kid behind the sick kid, right? Yes. What we want at Jake's is we want to help cover the stuff that is necessary so that the families can do the things that they want to.
And to your point, that medical insurance doesn't cover.
That it doesn't cover, so that if we can help that, then that means you can go to the zoo or you can go out on a date with your husband. Like, you can do the things that you should be able to do that you should not be able to do because your kid is sick. Correct. As we have started to get more and more applicants, I always say it's funny. It's not actually funny. But when we started 1,000% because we just wanted, to fill the void of losing Jake. And I always used to say, like, he was so brave and so strong and did all of these things. I really just wanted to still be able to talk about him and have I always call them the lessons I learned from him, right? And I think you could the lessons you learned from Logan, right? Absolutely. Like they're unbelievably strong. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, we were trying to figure that out. We're trying to figure out who are we trying to help and what's it look like. And in the beginning, it was kind of like kids just like Jake. But then we realized, no, it's really much bigger than that. One of the biggest struggles we have right now is that we do get requests from people outside of our geographical zone. And as much as we would like to help everybody, we just can't, because it's me, right? Like, we don't have a staff. We fundraise enough to what we can give out. And we've given out already more than I have ever thought we would. We're at just under $1.7 million.
Amazing.
It's so much money.
Oh, I saw the chills. That's great.
We're so proud of it, right? And we're so proud that we've done it in Jake's name. But it does lead to this greater issue. We love that we can help Logan and you and all of the families that we've helped, which is up to like almost 1,000 unique families. But what about the families that don't, right? Like there is just this frustrating, I don't even know what the word is in our society, right? Where like, and we can talk about music therapy, and we can talk about how, the music therapist convinced our board that it's valuable. And you can talk firsthand about how it has helped Logan in so many ways. But then we also can talk about it costing a couple grand a year. And not everyone can do that. And I don't know, it's hard to even know where to go with that. But
I just feel like right now we're inquiring about ABA services for Logan. So I have called the same facility 4 times in the past 3 weeks, no response. ABA is applied behavior analysis, I believe.
I was going to say, I
believe it's what it's for, but it's
super intense.
It's intense. It's like, it's regimented therapy where it's like, first you do this, then you do this, and then you do that. So it's structured therapy, which is like what Logan thrives on. Like he needs a plan. I know we're talking about music therapy but any of these. Yeah. My point is that I think as parents to special needs kiddos, to kiddos with disabilities, to kiddos with diagnoses, it's up to us to be their voice. Yep. And if you need or want these services for your child, like I said, I've called the same place 4 times in the past 2 weeks. They haven't called me back. Guess what I'm going to do tomorrow? I'm going to go knock on their door because I want these services for my child. If I have to pay for it out of pocket, I'll figure it out. I don't care if insurance covers it or not. If you have that faith and that desire for your child, you'll figure it out. And and I say this with empathy and hope. I'm not,
no.
I'm not trying to be aggressive about it. I'm trying to get the point across where it's like, you have the power as a parent to make that happen for your child. Like our Atlanta journey, they denied him. And I said, figure it out.
Yeah. And I think that like everything you've just said is 100%. When we came home from Boston Children's, I had already had to quit my job and all of that was great. But I would say, Jake required 24/7 care, but part of that was advocacy, right? Part of that was calling insurance and making sure things were getting covered. And okay, what do you need to get it covered? The one thing, and where we sort of started with Jake's Help from Heaven, but where I do think this message that you're saying is so important, because one of the reasons we started it was because I don't think that people always know that they can fight back, or that they can push back, or that they can question it, or, that you get denied, but then you can say, well, let's try again. Let's figure this out. If part of what the listeners can take away is that you do have that voice, and I love the way you said it, so I don't, because I think you were very effective in it, but it's okay to push back. It's okay to say, but wait, my kid needs this. Meet me in the middle. Help me get there. Help me understand.
I look at it, I've been in sales my whole career, and I look at it as sales, right? Like if I want to close a sale, then I need to get that customer on the phone. If that customer is not going to call me back or answer my call, well, then I'm going to go knock on the customer's door and ask questions. I look at it that way, like follow up. That's like my thing. And you don't know what you don't know. And especially with, people outside of the area or whatnot, like different states have different rules and laws and this and that. So there's not a handbook, right? There's no handbook. There's no cliff notes. Like you learn as you go. Ask questions, fight back, get referrals, like do what you have to do for your kid.
It's okay to take help, and it's okay to accept it, right? And to learn to accept it sometimes is very uncomfortable.
Because you feel so alone in the beginning. You're like, nobody has gone through this. Nobody knows what I'm going through. And they don't know what you're going through personally, but they've been in your shoes, so to speak, where they can be like, okay, this is how we figured it out. Let me try to help you.
Yep. And I think it's so important. And I do hope that the listeners sort of, if you're listening to it and you're feeling like you've got nothing, that your kid's struggling or you're struggling, I think the world is smaller than it used to be too, even with like social media. Like you can reach out to people, but I do think it does make the world smaller, and we can help and support each other. And like you said, there's no handbook for this.
But you're right. A lot of parents don't know they can advocate. A lot of parents don't know that, or people in general. I don't want to say parents in general. They don't know that they can ask questions. Like I've had moms message me on Facebook and be like, "Well, I need this, and the doctor didn't call me back." And I go, "When did you call the doctor?" They're like, "Last week." I'm like, "Did you try calling again?"
Yeah, call again. I remember a couple of times, like Brian would write everything down, and I would just be a psycho that remembered everything. Like it's sort of, I'd be like, well, on, December 7th, you gave him this and he had this reaction, because you just gotta remember, and then something to be like, oh, right, I missed that in the notes. Like they're humans too, right? Like I think sometimes we put everyone on this pedestal.
I tell people all the time, I don't care what letters are in front of your name or behind your name, you still put your pants on the same way.
Yeah. So thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I feel like sometimes I'm like a stalker, right? Because it's like I feel like I know you more than I actually do.
Same.
Because of social media.
Same.
So to be able to sit in this room and share this space has been great. We sometimes at the end of the show do this little segment called Ask Heather Anything. So if you've got time and or interest of Ask Heather Anything, here I am. Yes. Now I'm getting a little scared.
I don't even know. Heck, let's go with karaoke.
Oh, I do like karaoke.
What's your go-to karaoke song? We're talking about music.
All right, so karaoke. I have not done karaoke in years. I used to love some karaoke, and I was always Joan Jett. Yep, Joan Jett karaoke all day, every day. I love rock and roll. I thought I would crush it. I'm fairly certain I was horrible, but in my head, amazing.
Similar, Pat Benatar.
Ooh.
Hit Me With Your Best Shot.
Oh, that's a good one.
That's my jam.
Did you have like a guitar move with that one? I feel like
that's my jam. It's like my theme in life too, right? Like
that's a great one.
Hit me with your best shot. Bring it. Let's go. Put up your dukes. Let's get down to it. Hit me with your best shot.
But don't you
hit me with your best shot.
Fire away.
Ready?
Firing away.
Hit me with your best shot. Fire away.
So Jen, thank you so much for coming in. This was such a pleasure and so much fun, and I have loved talking with you and learning more about Logan and just being actually in person.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Awesome.
Really enjoyed it.
I hope to see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave us a thumbs up, or leave us a comment. We would appreciate all that you can do. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend or two. For more information and to leave us any feedback, please reach out to us at jakeshelpfromheaven.org.